The Parker mansion stood as a testament to opulence, with its sprawling gardens and meticulously maintained lawns. Inside, Emily, 8 months pregnant, was in the nursery, humming softly as she carefully arranged the tiny clothes and toys. Her eyes sparkled with joy and anticipation for the arrival of her baby. Every detail in the nursery reflected her love and meticulous planning. Meanwhile, in the study, Robert's face was flushed with frustration. He gripped his phone tightly, his voice a strained whisper. "Jessica, I told you soon. Just have a little more patience." On the other end, Jessica's voice was sharp and demanding. "Robert, you've been saying that for months. I'm tired of waiting. You need to make a decision. Now." Robert sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. I know, but it's complicated. Emily is 8 months pregnant. I can't just leave her like this." Jessica's tone shifted, becoming sweet. "Robert, if you really loved me, you wouldn't hesitate. Do you want our future together or not?" The question hung in the air like a dagger. Before Robert could respond, he heard footsteps approaching. "I have to go," he said quickly, and ended the call just as Emily entered the room. "Who were you talking to, darling?" Emily asked, her voice filled with innocent curiosity. "Just some business matters," Robert replied, forcing a smile. He leaned down to kiss her forehead, but his mind was elsewhere, still tangled in the web of his affair. That evening, during a family dinner, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Emily, however, was blissfully unaware. She chatted excitedly about the baby, describing her plans for the nursery in great detail. "I can't wait for you to see it, Robert. I've been working so hard to make it perfect." Robert nodded absent-mindedly, his thoughts drifting back to Jessica and her insistent demands. Across the table, George, Emily's father, observed his son-in-law with a scrutinizing gaze. George had always been protective of Emily, and lately he had sensed something was amiss with Robert. As the dinner progressed, George's suspicions grew. He watched Robert's distracted behavior and noted the lack of genuine engagement in his responses to Emily's enthusiasm. Once dinner was over, George discreetly instructed one of his trusted men to keep an eye on Robert. "Something isn't right," he murmured. "I need to know what he's up to." Back in the study, Robert's phone buzzed again. It was a message from Jessica. "You better not be ignoring me, Robert. We need to talk." Robert typed back quickly. "Not now. I'll call you later." Jessica, ever persistent, sent another message. "Fine, but don't think you can keep me waiting forever." As Robert read the message, he felt a pang of guilt. He looked out the window where the lush gardens were bathed in the soft glow of twilight. He knew he was living on borrowed time, caught between two worlds that were bound to collide. Emily, unaware of the storm brewing in her husband's mind, continued her preparations for the baby. She spent hours in the nursery, arranging and rearranging items, dreaming of the day she would hold her child in her arms. Her love and excitement were palpable, filling the room with a warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold deceit of Robert's actions. In the days that followed, Jessica's demands grew more insistent. She would call at odd hours, her voice dripping with impatience and irritation. "Robert, I'm not going to wait forever. You promised me a new life. Are you going to keep that promise or not?" Robert's responses became more strained, the pressure mounting with each conversation. He found himself torn between the life he had built with Emily and the intoxicating allure of a new beginning with Jessica. One evening, as he sat in the study, staring at the phone, it rang. It was Jessica again. "Robert, we need to talk. Now." "Jessica, this isn't a good time," he said, his voice edged with frustration. "Not a good time? It's never a good time with you," Jessica snapped. "You keep putting me off. Do you think I'm just going to sit here and wait for you forever?" Robert closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his double life bearing down on him. "I need more time," he said quietly. "Time? You're running out of it, Robert. Make a choice, me or her. I won't be second forever." Jessica's voice was cold and final. Robert hung up, his heart heavy. He looked around the opulent study, the trappings of his life of privilege and success, and felt a profound sense of loss. He knew that whatever choice he made, someone would be hurt. But the time for hesitation was running out. As he stood up to join Emily in the nursery, Robert knew that his time was running out, and the walls of his carefully constructed life were beginning to close in on him. As Robert joined Emily in the nursery, he forced a smile. "It looks wonderful, Emily. You've done an amazing job." Emily beamed. "Thank you, Robert. I can't wait for our little one to see it." Robert nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. Later that evening, after Emily had fallen asleep, he slipped out of the house and drove to a small cafe on the edge of the city. Jessica was already there, leaning back in her chair, her low-cut dress accentuating her curves. She played with a lock of her hair, her eyes locking onto Robert as he approached. "You're late," she said, her voice sultry. "I had to wait until Emily was asleep," Robert replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "We need to be careful." Jessica leaned forward, giving Robert a tantalizing view. "Careful? I'm tired of being careful, Robert. You promised me a new life. When is that going to happen?" Robert sighed, his eyes momentarily fixated on her cleavage. "Soon, Jessica. I just need to find the right time." Jessica pouted, her lips full and tempting. "Time? Robert, I've given you enough time. If you don't leave her soon, I'm done waiting. Do you understand?" Robert looked at her, feeling a familiar hunger stir within him. He reached out and touched her hand. "All right, I'll figure something out. Just give me a little more time." Jessica sat back, crossing her legs slowly, the movement drawing his eyes. "You better, Robert. I won't be second place forever." Back at the Parker mansion, Emily was starting to feel uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Robert had been distant, distracted. She decided to confront him the next morning. "Robert? Is everything all right? You seem preoccupied lately," she asked as they sat down for breakfast. Robert forced another smile. "Just busy with work, Emily. Everything's fine." Emily looked at him, searching his face for any hint of the truth, but found nothing. She nodded slowly, trying to push away her doubts. "All right. Just let me know if there's anything I can do." Robert nodded, but guilt gnawed at him. He knew he was lying to her, and it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. A few nights later, Robert and Jessica spent the night together in a hotel room, their plans for the future consuming their thoughts. Jessica lay next to Robert, her hand tracing circles on his chest. "Have you booked the flights?" she asked, her voice a mix of excitement and impatience. "Yes, everything is set for tomorrow," Robert replied, staring at the ceiling. Suddenly, Robert's phone rang on the nightstand. He reached over and saw that it was Emily calling. His heart skipped a beat as he answered. "Emily? What's wrong?" "Robert, it's happening. I'm going into labor." Emily's voice was filled with pain and panic. Panic surged through him. He knew Emily was in danger, but Jessica's words echoed in his mind. He turned to see Jessica watching him closely. "What's wrong?" she asked, sensing his hesitation. "It's Emily. She's going into labor," Robert said, his voice barely a whisper. Jessica's expression hardened. "You promised me, Robert. You can't back out now. We leave tomorrow." Robert hesitated, torn between his duty and the overwhelming desire Jessica ignited in him. "I have to go to the hospital," he said, standing up abruptly. "If you walk out that door, we're done," Jessica snapped, grabbing his arm. Robert shook her off and rushed out of the hotel, speeding to the hospital. When he arrived, Emily was doubled over in pain, clutching her belly. "It's too soon," she gasped. "Robert, help me." "Let's get you inside," he said, trying to stay calm. He helped her through the doors, and a team of doctors and nurses quickly took over, whisking Emily away to surgery. As Robert sat in the waiting room, his phone buzzed again. A message from Jessica. "Where are you? You can't just leave me like this." He ignored it, but then another message came through. "If you don't come back right now, I'm leaving. You'll never see me again." Robert felt torn. He glanced at the door to the operating room, knowing Emily needed him. But Jessica's demands were relentless, and the fear of losing her gnawed at him. Another message appeared. "You promised me, Robert. Don't make me regret everything." Feeling the pressure, Robert stood up. He paced the waiting room, torn between his wife in surgery and Jessica's ultimatums. The weight of his double life crushed him. He made a decision, one he knew was cowardly. He couldn't face losing Jessica. He typed back, "I'm on my way." Robert took one last look at the door to the operating room before turning and walking out of the hospital. As he drove away, the full weight of his betrayal settled heavily on his shoulders. Minutes later, George stormed into the hospital, his face a mask of fury. "Where's Robert?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the sterile halls. A nurse nervously replied, "He just left." George's face turned red with anger. "Find him," he ordered his men. "I want that coward brought to me." The Parker mansion, usually filled with warmth and light, now seemed cloaked in a heavy, oppressive silence. Emily lay in a hospital bed surrounded by machines that beeped rhythmically, marking the fragile thread of her life. She had given birth to twins, but the effort had left her in a coma, a tragic twist to what should have been a joyous occasion. George stood at the foot of her bed, his face a mask of controlled fury. He watched his daughter, his heart breaking and hardening at the same time. The doctors had done their best, but now it was a waiting game. George knew who was responsible for this, and he intended to make Robert pay. Back at the mansion, the staff moved quietly, aware of the tension in the air. George called his most trusted men into his study. "We need to find Robert," he said, his voice cold and determined. "He will not get away with this. I want him brought to me." Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Robert and Jessica arrived in the Caribbean. The island was a paradise, but for Robert, it felt like a gilded cage. They checked into a luxurious villa, but Robert's thoughts were far from the turquoise waters and white sands. Jessica, however, seemed to revel in their new surroundings. "Isn't this perfect, Robert?" she said, stretching out on a lounge chair by the pool. "We can finally start our life together." Robert forced a smile, but his mind was elsewhere. "Yeah, it's beautiful," he muttered, staring out at the ocean. Jessica noticed his distant look and leaned over, touching his arm. "Robert, what's wrong? We're here now. You should be happy." "It's just everything that happened back home. I can't stop thinking about it," Robert admitted, his voice tinged with guilt. Jessica's expression softened slightly, but there was a steely edge to her words. "You need to let that go. Emily is your past. I'm your future. Remember?" Robert nodded, but the weight of his actions was a constant burden. As night fell, he found himself lying awake, haunted by visions of Emily and the life he had abandoned. The next morning, as they sat down to breakfast, Jessica looked unusually serious. "Robert, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her tone softer than usual. "What is it?" Robert asked, his curiosity piqued. Jessica took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The news hit Robert like a punch to the gut. "Pregnant, are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure," Jessica replied, her eyes searching his face for a reaction. Robert felt a mix of emotions: fear, guilt, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. "This changes everything," he said quietly. Jessica nodded. "Yes, it does. We need to focus on our future now, more than ever." Back at the Parker mansion, George was mobilizing his resources. He contacted old friends and associates, using every connection he had to locate Robert. "No stone unturned," he instructed. "I want him found." Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the Caribbean villa grew palpable. Robert's paranoia increased, each ring of the phone, each knock on the door, sending a jolt of fear through him. Jessica, now dealing with the early stages of pregnancy, became more demanding and irritable. "Robert, you need to relax," she said one evening as they sat on the terrace. "You're driving me crazy with your constant worrying." "You don't understand," Robert snapped. "George won't stop until he finds me. I left Emily in a coma. He's not going to let that go." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Then we need to be smart. We need to stay ahead of him." Robert nodded, but the fear gnawed at him. He knew George's reach was extensive, and it was only a matter of time before he caught up to them. One morning, as Robert was sipping his coffee and staring at the ocean, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "We know where you are. You can't hide forever." Robert's heart raced. He showed the message to Jessica, who paled but quickly regained her composure. "We need to move, now." As they packed their things, Robert couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. Jessica tried to reassure him, but the cracks in their relationship were widening. The news of the pregnancy had added a new layer of pressure, and the constant fear of retribution loomed over them. Back at the hospital, Emily remained in a coma, her twins cared for by the nursing staff and watched over by George. He visited them daily, his resolve hardening with each passing day. He knew Robert was out there, and he would not rest until he was brought to justice. George's plan for revenge was meticulous. He used every contact, every resource at his disposal. He knew it was only a matter of time before he closed in on Robert. And when that happened, there would be no escape. Robert and Jessica's new life in paradise had turned into a nightmare. The serene setting was now a backdrop for their growing fear and tension. Robert realized too late that running away had only delayed the inevitable. The hospital buzzed with activity as doctors and nurses moved efficiently through the halls. When Emily finally opened her eyes, the bright lights of the room momentarily blinded her. She blinked, trying to make sense of her surroundings. A nurse noticed her awakening and quickly called for the doctor. "Mrs. Parker, can you hear me?" the doctor asked gently. Emily nodded weakly, her mind foggy. "Where am I?" "You're in the hospital. You gave birth to twins, but there were complications," the doctor explained. "You've been in a coma." Emily's eyes widened as she tried to remember. Flashes of pain, the frantic rush to the hospital, and then nothing. "My babies. Are they okay?" "They're healthy and doing well," the doctor reassured her. "Your father has been here every day, watching over them." As the days passed, Emily's strength slowly returned. With George by her side, she began to piece together what had happened. One afternoon, as she held her newborns, George sat beside her, his expression serious. "Emily, there's something you need to know," he began. "Robert, he abandoned you. He left with another woman." Emily felt a pang of betrayal, but it was quickly replaced by a fierce determination. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice steady. George recounted the events leading up to her coma, sparing no details. Emily listened in silence, her resolve hardening with each word. When he finished, she took a deep breath. "I need to protect my children," she said firmly. "Robert is no longer a part of our lives." George nodded, his respect for his daughter's strength evident. "I'll help you file for divorce and take legal action against him. We'll ensure he faces the consequences." Meanwhile, in the Caribbean, Robert and Jessica's life had become increasingly tense. Each day brought new threats from George's men. The once idyllic beach house felt like a prison. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his face paling. "It's another message," he said, showing it to Jessica. Jessica read the message aloud, her voice trembling. "You can't hide forever, Robert. We will find you." "How do they keep finding us?" Robert asked, his paranoia growing. "We've changed locations twice already." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "We need to be smarter. Change our numbers, cut off all contacts. But you need to keep it together, Robert." Robert ran a hand through his hair, the weight of his decisions crushing him. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Jessica moved closer, her tone softening. "We have to stay strong for our future. We can't let them win." Back at the hospital, Emily was becoming more proactive. With George's unwavering support, she began the legal process to sever ties with Robert. Each step brought her closer to reclaiming control over her life and the lives of her children. "Thank you, Dad," Emily said one day as they sat together in her room. "I couldn't do this without you." George squeezed her hand gently. "You are stronger than you know, Emily. We'll get through this together." As Emily continued her recovery, her transformation was evident. She was no longer the vulnerable woman who had been left behind. She was a mother, determined to protect her children and build a future without the shadows of betrayal. In the Caribbean, Robert's paranoia and Jessica's manipulative tactics created a volatile mix. Their relationship, once built on passion, was now strained under the pressure of their circumstances. Each threatening message from George's men chipped away at Robert's composure, while Jessica tried to maintain control. "Robert, we need a plan," Jessica insisted one night. "We can't keep running. We have to fight back." Robert shook his head, fear evident in his eyes. "Fight back? Against George? You don't know what he's capable of." Jessica's expression hardened. "Then, we find a way to make him back off. We have to be ruthless." As the tension between them grew, Robert realized that the paradise he had envisioned with Jessica was nothing more than a mirage. The reality of their situation was a constant reminder of the consequences of his actions. Emily was slowly recovering at the hospital, her days filled with physical therapy and moments of quiet reflection. Her twins, healthy and strong, were the bright spots in an otherwise challenging time. She spent hours watching them sleep, marveling at their tiny hands and feet, and dreaming of the future she would build for them. One afternoon, as Emily sat in her hospital room, gently rocking her daughter to sleep, there was a soft knock at the door. She looked up to see George enter, his expression serious, yet somehow hopeful. "Emily, there's someone here to see you," George said quietly. "Who is it, Dad?" Emily asked, curiosity piqued. George stepped aside, revealing a tall, lean man with piercing blue eyes. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Michael?" Michael nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "Hello, Emily." The room seemed to shrink as the past and present collided. Emily felt a surge of emotions, joy, confusion, and an undercurrent of anger. "Michael, they told me you were dead. How are you here?" Michael took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "I had to disappear, Emily. It was the only way to keep you safe." "Safe? From what?" Emily's voice was a mix of disbelief and frustration. Michael hesitated, then spoke, his tone measured and sincere. "Do you remember the blood sample you gave me in college for that genetics project?" Emily nodded slowly, memories flooding back. "Yes, I remember. You said it was just a routine assignment." "It was supposed to be," Michael admitted. "But what I found in your DNA was extraordinary. A unique mutation that could be the key to curing numerous diseases. That discovery put a target on my back, and yours." Emily's eyes widened. "So, you faked your death to protect me?" "Yes," Michael said. "The organizations that wanted my research would have stopped at nothing. By disappearing, I hoped to bury the truth and keep you out of danger." Emily's mind raced as she tried to process this revelation. "And now? Why are you here now?" "Because of your twins," Michael said, glancing at the babies with a mix of awe and concern. "If they inherited your genetic mutation, they could be in even greater danger. I had to come back to protect them." Emily looked at her children, a protective instinct flaring within her. "What do we do?" "We need to stay ahead of those who would exploit this," Michael replied. "I have some contacts who can help us, but we need to be careful. George has already begun taking precautions." George, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. "Emily, Michael has a plan. We're going to keep you and the twins safe, no matter what." Emily nodded, the weight of the situation settling over her. She looked at Michael, searching his face for the man she once loved. "I don't know if I can trust you, Michael. Not after all this time." "I understand," Michael said softly. "But I'm here now, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn that trust again. For you and for the twins." Back in the Caribbean, Robert and Jessica's situation was growing more precarious by the day. Each message from George's men increased Robert's paranoia. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and the once idyllic island now felt like a hostile territory. Jessica, noticing Robert's deteriorating state, tried to keep him focused. "We have to stay strong, Robert, for our child." Robert nodded, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. "I just don't know how much longer we can keep running." In the hospital, Emily began to see a different side of Michael. He was patient, dedicated, and deeply regretful of the pain his disappearance had caused. Slowly, she started to believe in his commitment to protect her and the twins. One evening, as they sat together discussing the future, Emily looked at Michael and said, "I need to know everything. No more secrets." Michael nodded, his expression serious. "You deserve the truth, and I promise, no more secrets." As Michael laid out the full scope of his research and the dangers they faced, the revelation of the twins' genetic significance brought a new level of danger. The hospital, usually a place of healing, now bristled with tension. Security had been heightened, and George's men were discreetly positioned around Emily's room. Emily herself was more alert, her maternal instincts on high alert as she cared for her twins. Michael was constantly by her side, his strategic mind always one step ahead, ready to counter any threat. Robert, driven by regret and a desperate need to make amends, had returned. He entered the hospital cautiously, unsure of the reception he would receive. As he approached Emily's room, he noticed several unfamiliar faces lurking in the corridors. Something felt off. "Emily," he said softly, entering her room. Her eyes widened in surprise, and a mix of emotions flashed across her face. "Robert, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice wary. "I came to see you and the twins. I needed to apologize," Robert said, his voice filled with genuine remorse. "I made terrible mistakes, and I want to make things right." Emily studied him for a moment before nodding slightly. "You can see them, but don't think this changes anything." Robert approached the bassinets, looking at his children with a mixture of awe and sorrow. "They're beautiful, Emily. I'm so sorry for everything." Before Emily could respond, George entered the room, his expression hardening as he saw Robert. "What are you doing here?" "I came to apologize," Robert said, "and to warn you. There are some men outside who don't look right." George scoffed. "Your words don't carry any weight here, Robert. Leave now." Robert hesitated. "Please, just check it out. For Emily and the twins' sake." But George waved him off. "Go, Robert. You've done enough." Reluctantly, Robert left the room, but didn't leave the hospital. Something about those men gnawed at him, and he decided to keep watch from a distance. He found a secluded spot where he could see the entrance to Emily's room and settled in, his nerves on edge. Hours passed, and the hospital's usual routine continued. Then, just as Robert's eyes began to droop from exhaustion, he saw them, the suspicious men moving purposefully toward Emily's room. His heart pounded as he realized the imminent danger. Without hesitation, Robert sprang into action. He darted down the hallway, his adrenaline fueling his movements. As he approached Emily's room, he saw one of the men slip inside. He burst through the door just in time to see the man reaching for the twins. "Get away from them!" Robert shouted, charging at the intruder. The room erupted into chaos. Emily screamed, clutching her babies tightly. George and Michael rushed in, alerted by the commotion. The mercenary turned, drawing a knife, but Robert tackled him, the two of them crashing into a nearby table. "Emily, get out of here!" Michael yelled, grabbing a chair to defend against another attacker entering the room. Emily, her instincts kicking in, wrapped the twins in a blanket and hurried to the door. Robert struggled with the first attacker, using every ounce of strength to keep the knife away. "You won't take them," he growled, landing a punch that sent the man reeling. Robert managed to disarm his opponent, but not without taking a slash to his arm. He grimaced in pain, but kept fighting, driven by the need to protect his family. "We'll be back," one of them snarled before disappearing into the chaos of the hospital. The immediate danger passed, but the tension lingered in the air. Robert, breathing heavily and clutching his bleeding arm, looked around the room. Michael stepped forward, his expression serious and concerned. "Robert, you're hurt," Michael said, motioning for Emily to grab a first aid kit. "We need to stop the bleeding." Emily, holding the twins close, nodded. "Sit down, Robert. Let me help." George, standing protectively by the door, watched as Emily and Michael worked together to tend to Robert's wound. The room was silent, save for the occasional wince from Robert as the bandage was applied. "Thanks," Robert muttered, his face pale. Emily finished bandaging Robert's arm, her hands gentle but efficient. "There, that should hold for now. We need to get you proper medical attention." Robert shook his head. "I'm fine for now. We need to talk." They gathered in the room, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken words. Michael began, "Years ago, Emily gave me a blood sample for a college genetics project. What I discovered was beyond extraordinary. Her DNA contains a unique mutation that has the potential to cure many diseases." Robert listened intently, his eyes widening. "And the twins?" "They inherited the same genetic mutation," Michael explained. "That's why they are targets. Certain organizations will stop at nothing to exploit this discovery." Robert absorbed the information, a mix of awe and dread washing over him. I know I've made terrible mistakes, but I want to be here for my children. I can't be a good husband to Emily, but I want to be a good father. Let me help protect them. Emily looked at Robert, her eyes searching for sincerity. I believe you, Robert. We need all the help we can get. George, though still wary, nodded. We need to be vigilant. They're going to come back. 2 weeks later, the day finally arrived for Emily to be discharged from the hospital. The staff had been briefed and security was tighter than ever. George had coordinated with his men to ensure a safe transition back to the Parker mansion. As they prepared to leave, Robert noticed an unusual amount of activity in the parking lot. Something's off, he muttered, scanning the area. Emily, carrying one of the twins, turned to him. What do you mean? Robert's eyes narrowed. Stay close. We need to move quickly. They made their way to the hospital exit, flanked by George and Michael. Suddenly, a group of armed men emerged from the shadows, their intentions clear. Chaos erupted as the attackers moved in with deadly precision. Get down! George shouted, pushing Emily behind a car. In the midst of the battle, George saw an attacker aiming directly at Emily. Without hesitation, he threw himself in front of her, taking the bullet meant for his daughter. He fell to the ground, the pain searing through him. Dad! Emily screamed, rushing to his side. Robert and Michael fought off the remaining attackers, managing to subdue them. The leader of the mercenaries, realizing defeat, tried to flee but was captured by George's men. The hospital staff, now fully aware of the situation, moved in to secure the area. As Emily cradled George's head in her lap, tears streaming down her face, he looked up at her, his voice weak but firm. Protect the children, Emily, promise me. I promise, Dad, she whispered, her heart breaking. George's eyes found Robert. Take care of them. Don't let my sacrifice be in vain. Robert, his own eyes filled with tears, nodded. I will. I swear it. With a final breath, George closed his eyes, leaving his family devastated but more determined than ever. The police arrived quickly, taking statements and securing the scene. The captured attacker, under interrogation, revealed the extent of the conspiracy against Emily and the twins. His testimony led to the dismantling of the organization that had been hunting them. The day of George's funeral was heavy with emotion. Friends, family, and colleagues gathered to pay their respects to a man who had given everything to protect his family. The air was filled with the soft murmurs of condolences and the gentle rustle of leaves as a breeze swept through the cemetery. Emily stood at the front, holding the twins close to her. Robert, his arm still bandaged, stood beside her. Michael was on her other side, his hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. As the service concluded, Emily stepped forward to speak. My father was a man of incredible strength and courage. He sacrificed everything to protect us, and his legacy will live on through us and through my children. We will honor him by living lives that he would be proud of. Tears flowed freely as Emily finished her speech. The attendees moved to lay flowers on George's grave, each one a symbol of the respect and love they held for him. After the funeral, the family began to rebuild their lives. Emily and Michael decided to move to a new home in a peaceful, secluded area. The house was nestled in a quiet valley, surrounded by trees and far from the chaos that had threatened them. It was a fresh start, a place where they could protect the genetic secret of the twins and find some semblance of normalcy. Robert had chosen to stay nearby, determined to be a part of his children's lives. He had accepted that he could never repair his marriage to Emily, but he was committed to being the best father he could be. One day, while discussing the children's progress, Robert mentioned to Emily that Jessica had given birth. Jessica had her baby yesterday, he said, looking at Emily with a hint of concern. I've been visiting her and taking care of things there." Emily felt a pang of curiosity and a surprising sense of concern. She remembered the difficult path Jessica had taken and the mistakes she had made. "Maybe I should go see her," Emily said, more to herself than to Robert. "Could be a good idea," Robert agreed. "I think she could use a friend right now." The next day, Emily decided to visit Jessica at the hospital. She knew it was the right thing to do, despite everything that had happened between them. She made her way to Jessica's hospital room, her heart pounding with a mix of apprehension and determination. When Emily knocked on the door, Robert opened it, looking surprised but not displeased. "Emily, come in," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. Inside the room, Jessica was sitting up in bed, holding her newborn son. She looked tired but content. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw Emily. "Emily, what are you doing here?" "I heard you had the baby," Emily said gently. "I wanted to see how you were doing." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "Come in," she said, motioning to a chair beside her bed. Emily sat down, watching Jessica carefully as she cradled her son. Robert stood nearby, his expression a mix of concern and relief. "How are you feeling?" Emily asked. Jessica sighed, looking down at her baby. "It's been overwhelming. I didn't realize how hard it would be, but he's worth it." Emily smiled softly. "They always are. What's his name?" "David," Jessica said, her voice filled with emotion. "Emily, I need to apologize for everything. I was selfish and cruel, and now that I'm a mother, I realize just how wrong I was." Emily reached out, placing a hand on Jessica's arm. "Jessica, it takes a lot of courage to admit that. What's important is that you're trying to change. We can't undo the past, but we can shape the future." Jessica's tears flowed freely. "Thank you, Emily. That means more than you know." Robert, watching the exchange, felt a deep sense of relief. He had worried about how this meeting would go, but seeing Emily and Jessica connect in this way gave him hope. As the months went by, Jessica and Emily developed a close friendship. Their shared experiences as mothers brought them together in ways neither had expected. Back in the valley, life took on a steady rhythm. Michael continued his research, driven by the desire to protect his family and unlock the potential of the genetic mutation. His dedication never wavered, and Emily admired his relentless pursuit of knowledge. One evening, as the sun set over their new home, the family gathered in the living room. The twins played on the floor, their laughter filling the room with joy. Emily looked around, feeling a deep sense of peace. "We've come a long way," she said softly. Robert nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We have, and we'll keep moving forward together." Michael placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "George would be proud of us." Emily smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. "He would, and we'll make sure his sacrifice is never forgotten." The Parker family, though scarred by their past, was united by their shared experiences and losses. They had created a new foundation, one built on trust, resilience, and love. The future, once filled with uncertainty, now held the promise of peace and happiness. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. Today I want to talk about Emily Parker, the true hero of this story. Emily's journey is nothing short of inspiring. She faced betrayal from her husband, Robert, and the manipulations of Jessica, all while protecting her children from incredible danger. Through it all, she remained strong and focused on what mattered most, her family. Honestly, if I were in Emily's shoes, I don't know if I could have forgiven Robert and Jessica. The pain and betrayal would be too much for many of us to bear. But Emily did it. She chose to forgive, to build a better future, and to support Jessica as a new mother. Her capacity for forgiveness and resilience is truly remarkable. Emily's story reminds us that forgiveness and strength are intertwined. By letting go of anger, she found peace and a way forward for her family. She's shown us that even in the darkest times, we have the power to create a brighter future with courage and love. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Emily's incredible story. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have been able to forgive like Emily did? I'd love to hear your perspective. Until next time, take care and stay strong.